So one way of thinking about the future is to look at the past and try to extrapolate it. But that only works for a while, because sometimes the rules change. And that makes it interesting to figure out where are the parts of the world where the rules might change. We have questions in computing where quantum computing and artificial intelligence might totally transform what it means to do computing. We have various forms of manufacturing that are unsustainable, and people are deciding we are going to do something different in the future. We just don't know what yet. And you have the surprises where we discover new laws of nature or new ways of doing things. In some cases, you can predict that there are transitions coming. In some cases, we can put bounds on how radically things can be changed. But quite often, we can't make much predictions because it's dependent on human values, human goals, human decisions. Now, the good news is this also means that we have an open future. If the future was predetermined, there was no point in having a future fest. If the future was just totally unpredictable, again, it wouldn't be much of a point because nobody can say anything useful. We can't decide for anything better or worse. We actually have opportunities to affect that future. And that is partially because some of these complex subsystems in the future, we have an inkling about them. There are aspects of human nature, like us being social beings, that means that some activities are going to go on in the future. There are some natural laws, like the laws of thermodynamics, that limit what we can do. There are also ideas that can come up and give rise to entirely new possibilities. We can't predict what those ideas are, but we can see where people are poking around. People are questioning old models of social organizations, old forms of economic systems, figuring out new ways of creating trust using not just government and social organizations, but using blockchains and artificial means. So the role of technology is interesting because it's somewhat tangible. You can point at a machine, you can point at an industrial process and say what it has effect. But equally important is the impact investment. Somebody needed to decide that kind of industry was good. We really need that form of food production rather than that one. We want to disrupt this part of the carbon economy. So that is a bit more subtle. So I'm very happy to learn about the impact investment by being here. It's amazing to see the growth, especially since many people in the field, many experts actually also have been surprised that, whoa, we didn't know this could actually happen. Once you got enough compute, enough data, suddenly some of the networks perform much better. And this has led to this current revolution going on inside machine learning, where it's starting to be applied more and more. Every day we're using recommender system. Every day we're using text completion that is actually built on rather sophisticated language models. More and more decisions are being made by AI. This causes a lot of concern about how do we make sure it's just, how do we make sure it's reliable, who has control over these systems. Much of the research we do at FHI in Oxford is about the far end. Once the AI becomes super powerful, what do we do about that? Can you keep control over it? Or can you at least make sure it's aligned with human interests and values? In between, we have this complex landscape of emerging applications. And people are discovering both that some things that looked amazingly hard in the past have become surprisingly easy. You can do some text processing that we believed required genuine intelligence just using advanced text models. It turns out that driving a car is simultaneously much easier than we once thought, and very hard to do in a city in a safe way that makes everybody happy. And in many cases, the real problem is the interaction between the human system and the AI system. We still haven't learned how to design that collective effect. Quite often when things go wrong, it's a combination of machines not quite doing what we think they should be doing, and humans responding to that in also ways that nobody could see beforehand. And that causes trouble. I think there is not enough people coming to the table yet. People are of course always screaming about we need better diversity or we need stakeholder representatives from various groups. But I think actually we just need way more people, and also people poking at the systems. When I grew up in the early 1980s, the home computer revolution had started. A lot of people got hold of little home computers, connected them to the television set and started programming. They were maybe not that useful. Most people were just playing computer games, but it also helped create a generation that were somewhat used to computers and the issues they posed, that were then much more ready for the 90s when we got the PCs and the web for real. I think we need the same thing for artificial intelligence. We actually need to do this playing around, experimenting individually and collectively. What can we do? What are the toy examples we can do? And then we can participate in a much more educated way in the bigger conversation about how do we control this, what do we want to use it for. Because I fear that right now we're looking at particular keywords. People say facial recognition is super problematic. And people are just talking about facial recognition, but there is a whole cloud of identity technologies that are getting real. Computer vision is getting good enough that it can identify what any kind of object are. We can maybe ban it from recognizing people, but it will be identifying our clothes and our cars and everything else. And if we just make up rules based on the assumption that it's just the faces that is the privacy problematic part, we're going to make the wrong decisions. Conversely, we don't really know the full limits of what we can achieve in some of these systems, and that's going to require a lot of creativity and experimentation. So right now, there is some work going on at the United Nations level. So there is the new Our Common Agenda from the General Secretary that is suggesting that we need to have a big discussion about this. There are various non-profits and think tanks that are getting interested. I'm involved in a long-term space governance network informally, thinking about what rules would be good in the very, very long run, and then trying to go back from them to think what should we be doing over the next few years. But of course, the big powers are also going to be rather forceful in trying to promote their agenda, and you have to work around that. So when you create an artificial intelligence system, you have to give it some goals. It might be do as I say, or maximize shareholder profit, or something else. And then it's going to try to fulfill these goals to its best ability. Now, if it's very powerful, it might do this in a devastating manner. After all, it might maximize the stock market profit by doing unethical investment or really ruthlessly oppressing people. So you want to set the goal in the right way. You want to have values that are aligned with human values. Even though I might not tell my artificial intelligence everything about being a human, it should hopefully understand enough so it doesn't do anything atrociously bad. This is a very hard problem because how do you describe the human condition? But this is not just a problem, of course, for an artificial intelligence. You can imagine the same problem for a company. If the goal of a company is maximize shareholder value and only that, maybe the company is going to do some very ruthless things. Indeed, it might even be that no people inside the company wants to do that, but they all feel constrained by the rules they have created. In some sense, the company itself acts as an artificial intelligence made out of people and pieces of paper and a shared understanding. And we have similar problems in the economy. Many aspects of economy might be suboptimal for us humans, or actually might be bad for our values, yet they emerge naturally from the interactions. That leads to this interesting question. Could we solve the value alignment problem for many different kinds of systems? It's not just that we want a robot to understand what it means to be helpful. We ideally want a company to understand what is helpful and being a good corporate citizen, or for the market to actually work for human values than against it. This is a fundamentally, profoundly hard problem about complex adaptive systems, philosophy, programming, but it also seems to be one of the best problems to work on. So technologies are usually concrete things. You can point at the device, you can point out the industrial manufacturing process, and that means that you can monitor them and you can start making up rules about them. When something in society becomes measurable, typically society starts having opinions about it, while the parts of our lives that are hard to measure because they're just very human are usually quite outside the societal range. Now, many of these softer parts are super important. Our social norms have a tremendous effect on justice and equality in society, but they're also much harder to regulate. Usually when we get regulations on how to behave socially, they're very constricting and you feel rather bad about having to abide with them, even if they are very well-meaning. Technology, people can control a little bit more and it feels much less problematic. The really interesting part, though, is many technologies have a social component. A laptop is not just a piece of electronics. It's also a set of practice about where it's suitable to use laptops, how you use laptops, where laptops are being used in companies and elsewhere. We see it even more, of course, with our smartphones. They're all surrounded by these practices that are part of what we do. And some of these practices are very social things and given their value. Many of the social media are not worth anything without the kind of social network that they're attached to. The problem is, when society wants to control a technology, it can only grasp the technology part. It has a hard time grasping the more soft social part. So impact investing is trying to do this audacious thing of not just investing so you make money, which to me as a non-investor is kind of awesome enough, but also invest, make money, and have a positive impact. And that means that you need to understand the system you're in. You need to understand the world, or at least have a model of the world. The amazing thing about impact investment is, of course, you're putting your money on the line. You're also getting very strong feedback if this is working out. And you're motivated to actually get it right, because otherwise you will lose your money. That is very different from a lot of projects governments and academia do, because, well, we might be interested in academia and learning things, but having it work, well, that doesn't give me extra citation for my paper. In the government, well, starting a grand project is great, you might get elected for that, but having it work out, you're much less likely to get rewarded. Impact investment sits in that wonderful spot where many incentives are aligned. It also tries to do something that's extremely hard. And I think all other parts of society should be doing their best to help figure out how to help impact investors actually do things better. And then, of course, endlessly discuss what good impacts are. The value part is perhaps the most profound frontier here. What are you trying to do? What is the good? And that is something I think we all want to be involved in.